So this would probably surprise a lot of people who know me in real life, at least people who I speak to about video games in any way, which is, not most people I know, because frankly, I'm too embarrassed to talk about my hobbies in most real life situations. But most people who know me at least enough to know my video game taste would probably be surprised to learn that this is the first time I've ever actually played through the entirety of Final Fantasy One. People would be surprised by that because Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6 are all quite possibly in my top 10 games of all time. Well, maybe that's Final Fantasy 6 definitely is. Maybe 4 and 5 would fall somewhere short of that in the top 20, but let's just put it this way: the Final Fantasy Super Nintendo trilogy is on the sacred tier of gaming for me, right? That's insert the meme of the guy going, "That's why it's the GOAT." The GOAT. That's how I feel about Final Fantasy, the Super Nintendo trilogy. So, yeah, people might be surprised to learn I've never actually played Final Fantasy 1 to completion until today. I'm recording this on a Wednesday, April 26, 2023. I just beat the game today. First time I've ever beaten it. I have owned a copy on NES for 35 years, something like that at this point. But I never actually got through it, even though, because I was too young to even understand it, of course, when it came out. But I did get into games through RPGs through Final Fantasy IV when I was about 6 years old. Of course, we called it Final Fantasy II back then because that was what it was released as. But that's how I got into RPGs and kind of even sharpened my reading skills, I would say, in a way. As rudimentary as the writing and the English translation at least might be. It was for a 6-year-old, is reasonably advanced. So and then I kind of tried to go back to playing Final Fantasy 1, the NES cartridge that we had, and I found it unplayable for one specific reason at the time, which was the fact that when you are targeting monsters, so in Final Fantasy 4 or 2 as it was known then on Super Nintendo, when you just hit the fight command, for example, in battle, or use spells on enemies, if the enemy you're trying to attack has already been killed by the time you get around to your turn on it, it'll just move on to the next enemy. In Final Fantasy 1 on NES, it won't do that. You'll hit nothing. That just one little thing made the game basically unplayable for me. Plus, I was never really in love with the NES aesthetics of it back then, which isn't to say I don't like retro aesthetics. I go back and play a lot of NES games all the time. Just that one felt a little rough for me. I don't know so I never beat it back then. And then I did try again when Dawn of Souls came out, because I do have that on Game Boy Advance also, but for whatever reason that playthrough fizzled out too. I think I got through maybe the Lich and the door of the Earth Cave or whatever, but I don't think I made it much further than that. So this is actually the first time I've beaten the game all the way through. I downloaded it the day it came out, April 19th, the Pixel Remaster for Switch. 7 days. It took me 1 week exactly. I did basically every single thing in the game except for beating Warmech in front of Tiamat's bridge there. I ran around and got into 10 battles, and then I looked it up and people were saying they did over 100 battles before they found Warmech, and I was just like, nah, I'm not going to do that. So, but I did everything else in the game except that. I visited every town. I bought almost every spell that was available. I had both a black mage and a white mage. Got Excalibur, did the class changing, visited every place. So yeah, I think I cleaned the game out except for Warmech. I didn't use any of the Pixel Remaster's special features except for the using the auto battle. You could hit the Y button on the Switch controller, and whatever the last input commands you had used for the characters it would just keep doing those again and again, and kind of double speed to the end of the battle. It wasn't like an emulator double speed because it kept the music the same speed, which was nice because it's more pleasant to listen to. But so if everyone, you just hit fight for all 4 characters, just hit Y, and they'll just keep using fight to the end of the battle. If you have used, Blizzara with your Black Mage, he'll just keep using that, and everyone else will fight to the end of the battle, etc., etc. I used that, and of course I used the hold B to run. I did not ever touch the turning off auto battle feature, or increasing or decreasing the rate of gold and experience points. I just did those authentic style ×1 through the whole game. Never messed with those. Had 0 deaths, 0 terminated through the whole game. Isn't that what it said in the Final Fantasy 1 NES when your whole party died, terminated? Nope, 0 party wipeouts the whole game. In fact, I was never in any meaningful risk whatsoever. hit, I think, level 50 before the end of the game, and I only did a couple quick grind sessions, just right outside like boss rooms usually. I did one outside of the town where you get the canoe. I can't remember what the town was called off the top of my head. The one that's kind of you have to get to it with the ship on the eastern side of the world. It's surrounded by kind of like lakes and a river that leads to the volcano. I did maybe 15 minutes of grinding outside of that town, and I did a little bit of grinding literally right outside the last boss's final room to get up the last couple levels to level 50. But other than that, no major grinding. I didn't use a guide for everything, but I have somewhat limited gaming time these days compared to at least when I was a child, so I didn't spend 5 hours crisscrossing the entire map to try to figure out to take the Levistone to the desert to get the airship, or I was supposed to take the ferry to that one town or visit that one guy standing by the graveyard in Melmo or wherever the town is called, to do the Rosetta Stone. Little things like that kind of like it almost, that kind of puzzle elements almost remind me of like the old school like Sierra Quest games, like King's Quest and Quest for Glory, stuff like that. Just crisscross the entire world until you find this one pixel that's what you need to advance. So when it came to stuff like that, I was just like, nah, if I hit that kind of dead end, I'm just looking at the guide to find out what to do next. I just kind of looking to get through this thing. But other than that, I didn't, at least all the bosses and whatnot, I tried to figure out how to beat authentically. I don't think I ever looked at any, stats or anything online for any of that, and got through all the dungeons pretty much as legitimately as I could. It's mostly just kind of those little puzzle element type dead ends where it's like, okay, where the hell do I go next? I looked at a guide. I have, no pride about that. If that anyone out there who's such a stickler for a tradition, that means that I didn't legitimately beat the game in their eyes. Well, I respect that, but I just kind of want to get through it. But in my opinion, I did legitimately beat the game because, like I said, I never touched the Pixel Remasters options for turning random encounters off or changing your experience for gold levels. So I did all the challenge-wise stuff quite legitimately and had no particular major difficulty. I had a couple characters die during the final boss fight against Chaos, but I had a full heal or whatever it's called, the Arise type thing where it's your revive them and restore them to 100% health. So I just used that with my white mage. My team was I did 2 fighters. I might have enjoyed the visual kind of dynamism of having a thief or a black belt instead of the second fighter, but everything I've ever heard for the last 30 years has been saying that you just want to go with the fighters in terms of the physical abilities. So I just did that. 1 black mage, 1 white mage. Being honest, through like damn near 90% of the game, I was just kind of wishing I'd just gone with 4 fighters, because it just always felt like my black mage in particular was just lagging hilariously far behind everyone else in terms of damage output, particularly in getting through the dungeons in the overworld, because because of the spell system, which I'll discuss in a minute. I mostly couldn't just spam attack magic. I mostly had to save it for kind of getting deeper into dungeons and the boss fights. So I was using the attack option a ton with a black mage. And so we had these situations where my fighters are hitting for like 200, 250, 300 hit points. And then the black mage is hitting for 4 hit points against normal bad guys. So I spent a lot of the game just being like, maybe I just should have got 4 fighters, because I was stacking up tens of thousands of gold and then hundreds of thousands of gold, and I was like, I can just fill up on 99 high potions and use them between battles. So maybe I should have just taken 4 fighters with me and just not done mages at all. Although that said, by the end game I'd kind of changed my mind on that, because by the final boss fights, namely against Tiamat in the Sky Castle, the floating islands, and then the 4 rematches with Tiamat and Lich and Kraken and whatever the fire one was called in the Chaos Shrine or whatever, and then final battle against Chaos. In those battles with a Holy on the white mage and Flare on the black mage, not to mention the Healaga to heal the whole team on the white mage, then they were pulling their weight even more than the fighters. Then we had the fighters doing, a quarter as much damage as the black mage was doing with Flare. So by the last boss, I was I had finally come around to being happy that I hadn't picked 4 fighters, but through most of the game, they were definitely lagging. But yeah, so I guess it's almost balanced and not balanced in that way. Like, things finally came around, like in literally the last 10% of the game. I think TV Tropes even has a page on that. It's called Linear Fighters, Quadratic Wizards, or something like that, where your fighters just gradually get stronger, and then your your mages just get massively stronger at the end game. And this game did reflect that for me. I should mention that obviously everything I say here is aimed specifically at the Pixel remaster, because like I said, that is the only version of Final Fantasy 1 that I've ever played through to the end credits. So all this stuff I'm saying might be totally different in the NES version. I definitely remember the NES version being vastly more difficult than this. That's probably, I would assume that's to some extent due to kind of a, messing with adjusting the stats in the game to maybe make it a little easier. Plus, I know that this version, even though I didn't need to use it, doesn't add an autosave in every new room. So if you die at a boss, for example, you don't go back to the beginning of the dungeon with all your progress and experience erased. You just get to retry that boss room again. But and also, like I mentioned, they actually do retarget your if you've attacked a enemy that gets killed between when you hit the attack button and when the turn comes around, it redirects it to another enemy. So, but beyond that, I do think they probably altered the internal stats to make it a little bit easier too. Now, moving on from just kind of describing my playthrough to more kind of reviewing the game. Well, okay, I'll start with positives. I think that, just in a historical perspective, obviously I respect this game for what it did for the console RPG, what it did for the growth of the JRPG as a genre in the just slightly post Dragon Quest world. Obviously, if this game didn't exist, we wouldn't have Final Fantasy VI, and I wouldn't want to live in a world without Final Fantasy VI. That would suck ass. A lot of great iconography in terms of the basic, your fire spells, your ice spells, your lightning spells, your white mages and black mages, their iconic designs, kind of the general feel of the battle system. I know the original NES version was different. They've updated this to make it kind of a bit more in lines with the look and feel of the battle system that was established in Final Fantasy IV, minus the active time battle system, which is really what brought these Super Nintendo games to life, I feel like, in a way that the original Nintendo games are never quite the same as. And this Pixel remaster, I thought looked and sounded absolutely gorgeous. I can't really complain about any of the sprite work whatsoever. I thought the overworld, that is the main map where you're walking between the towns, looked pretty basic. But once you got into the towns, I thought everything just had that perfect RPG feel. They did a really good job designing it. I'm really glad that this version changed the font from what looked like the overly smooth, kind of modern-looking font that the original PC release of Pixel Remaster last year had. I thought that was a very good decision. I thought that they did a great job composing the music. A few times during the game, just to mix up the experience and just have a little fun with it, I changed back to the original background music, the NES version. And it gave me appreciation for what a good job they did with the remixes and the instrumentation in the Pixel Remaster, because everything sounded great. I never got bored of the battle music. I heard probably hundreds of times through the game. I mean, you fight and fight and fight and fight and fight going through these dungeons. I never got bored of it. I thought it all sounded great. Some of the dungeon music was a little too whimsical for my taste at points. There was all these dungeons where it was like do 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 do. I was like, this doesn't sound like a very intimidating background track, and you're going to fight the Dread Lich that's taking over the underworld, or the fire demon at the center of the heart of the volcano or whatnot. But it was all right. But yeah, I think in terms of what they did with the Pixel Remaster, I really have no complaints. I will say in this game specifically, I don't believe this is the case, and I know it's not the case in the Super Nintendo trilogy. I'm not sure about 2 and 3. I haven't played them yet. It did get kind of annoying how it changes to a different music every time you bring up the menu, which in a game like this you do quite a bit. In like a old school console JRPG, every time you hit X to change equipment or use an item or whatnot, it changes to this new song. That was a little bit, they could have changed that in the Pixel Remaster and I wouldn't have complained. I found that aspect a little bit annoying, but it is what it is. All that said, not to step on any toes or upset anyone who this might be one of their favorite games, more power to you. I did ultimately find the experience to be probably kind of mixed at best on multiple fronts, not just on the story front or on the gameplay front, but both. I guess we'll talk about story first. So, silent protagonists, I think they have their place in gaming. Like, I have no problem with the fact that, Mario in most of the Mario games and Link in the Zelda games doesn't have, reams of dialogue. That's fine. In JRPGs, it's kind of I've always been a little bit mixed on it. I understand it's to make kind of a blank slate protagonist you can project yourself onto a little bit, but it's not a preference of mine, which is like, for example, most online rankings of like Super Nintendo games I see will put Chrono Trigger over Final Fantasy VI, and don't take me as anti Chrono Trigger. I love Chrono Trigger too. That's another game that would rank very high on my favorites list. But Final Fantasy VI is it for me over Chrono Trigger, and that might come down a lot to the fact that just having that silent protagonist, in Chrono himself, it's just something's missing a little bit there for me. But even in a case like that, you have Chrono surrounded by interesting personalities like Magus and Frog / Glenn and Isla and Luca and whatnot. Here, it's a whole team of silent protagonists, not just silent but nameless, essentially faceless. I know they technically have little pixelated faces, but not interesting, unique designs like Chrono would have, or Ness in Earthbound, another silent protagonist. At least he has an interesting and memorable and iconic design. Here, the fighter and the Black Mage is iconic in his own way, of course, but as a personality type, not an individual character. In this. So none of them have characters, none of them have names, and that goes to the side characters basically and the villains too. Who are the major side characters in the game? There's that witch lady you get the eye for, the stone giant, Princess Sarah. Most of these characters you meet once, maybe twice in the case of the witch, and they don't really have stories or much in the way of personalities. Same with the villains, the four fiends, you basically meet them once each, and they have 3 or 4 dialogue boxes about "Mwaha, I'll kill you." And the main villain, Garland, you meet twice. Doesn't really have any scheme or any kind of a twist with him or much personality. So it's like a game that doesn't really have much in the way of characters, not much in the way of lore, other than kind of a basic. I guess there is the time travel bit, but we'll swing back to that a little later. I'd like to talk more about that when I talk about the ending. But yeah, it's no real cutscenes where anything big happens, other than maybe when they blow up the little dwarf cave to open the canal. But nothing on par with even cutscenes from any Super Nintendo RPG I could think of. It's very, very basic in that way. So it's a game that has really strong aesthetics, particularly this pixel remaster, and does a good job with kind of setting up kind of a world and certain iconography of the series. But there's very little story here other than there's 4 demons who have the elemental crystal powers. Go kill them. Go to the main castle. Yeah, it's just it's just not a lot of personality to it in that way. Even gameplay wise, it felt extremely basic. It's like Final Fantasy V has these great mechanics. I know it's not fair to judge it against this game that came out later. Not that much later, though, really. Were Final Fantasy 1 and 5 separated by 5 years, I think, maybe? But Final Fantasy V had all these great mechanics of changing classes, getting abilities, moving them between classes. I think even 3, I'm not an expert on it. I'm going to be playing it for the first time, too. Can't you change classes in that game? Here you just pick and you're kind of stuck at the beginning. And most of the game just felt like a trek through very straightforward dungeons. There's little twists like the volcano, you have to step in lava tiles. The ice dungeon has cracking floors, but mostly everything felt pretty straightforward. The bosses were all very simple. There were none that I had any strategy with at all, other than fight with the fighters, heal with the white mage, use the strongest attack magic I have with the black mage. Except for the last boss, I tossed out a few elixirs and used the protect spell and a haste with the black mage. But other than that, everything very straightforward. Granted, maybe I'm playing on easy mode a little bit here, playing the Pixel Remaster. I'm sure they made things a bit easier, but yeah, I don't know, it just all felt kind of basic. It didn't have a lot of the fun kind of mechanics we would get down the line with Final Fantasy V's ability switching, 6's party member swapping, and the Espers, materia, and so on. But even 4 felt more complex with the various ways the characters' abilities kind of fit together, puzzles and pieces in a puzzle. Here, just it's pretty basic. I mean, like I said, through most of the game, I just kind of wish I had just gone with 4 fighters and just every battle was just fight. I've kind of criticized RPGs in the past, maybe for having a fairly straightforward kind of a town, cutscene, overworld dungeon structure, but at least those ones maybe had the cutscene, and here it just felt like town, dungeon. I mentioned this earlier, but I guess I should get into it more as long as I'm talking mechanics. I definitely did not particularly enjoy the spell pool thing for the each spell has a number of uses, right? Or I guess each class of spell technically, instead of a general magic point pool. And that led to annoying situations where, like, even though I spent the thousands to get the poison spell so the white mage could heal poison, I still found myself taking a bunch of antidotes with me because the poison or whatever, I had 4 uses of it at first, which went up to 8 through the course of the game. But still, through a long dungeon with tons of enemies who use poison, still I would still run out of the poison pretty quick. And it's kind of annoying compared to future games where it would just be Final Fantasy VI, at least the SNES version, I think the spell is called Antidote, and it just costs 3 magic points and you could just toss those out. So yeah, it got slightly annoying. I'm glad they moved away from that anyway, I'll say that. I think that actually might be more the way the Dungeons and Dragons does it. Is that a mechanic they took from old school 80s Dungeons and Dragons, each spell having its own number of uses maybe? In general, I probably wasn't the biggest fan of getting spells by buying them from shops. Granted, I know that Final Fantasy V does the same thing, but I do prefer, I prefer even getting them through level ups. But definitely my favorite would be in kind of 6 and 7 when you learn them from espers and materia through mechanics in the menu and leveling up ability points in battle. That was my favorite way to do it. But for equipping the fighters, I did like how much equipment was in the dungeons, because it did incentivize exploration, despite the fact that you had to deal with tons of battles, which does have its own incentive in that you gain levels. But I did like how you explore each corner of every dungeon, particularly later in the game when you're stocking up on so much equipment, so many helmets and shields and swords and stuff. So that was kind of neat. But yeah, mechanically, it did feel like JRPG 101, which it was JRPG 101 or 102 at the most. I mean, this was granted. I guess I should take history into perspective and acknowledge, with even the 4 party members and the classes, this is a more complex and ambitious start in a lot of ways than Dragon Quest 1 was. And heck, I complained about taking the levitation crystal to get in the desert to get the airship. Dragon Quest 1 is way more obscure with that, with having to count your steps in the overworld and walk into this swamp to find this one tile to get what you need to advance through the game. Now that's a game I could never, I would never have gotten through I could have, as a kid, put 1,000 hours in a Dragon Quest 1 without a guide, and I never would have figured it out. I never would have pieced the game together. It would have been completely impossible. So maybe Final Fantasy 1, objectively, I would say probably a better game than Dragon Quest 1, even if I think Dragon Quest 1 is almost a little more iconic in certain ways, with some of the general themes and music and the slimes of that series. But I will say Final Fantasy 1 probably better than that, especially this pixel remaster version, which probably not fair to compare the Final Fantasy 1 pixel remaster to the original NES Dragon Quest 1, or Dragon Warrior as it was called then. But yeah, it was interesting. I'm glad I played through it for the experience, but probably not going to be something I revisit frequently if I want to do a Final Fantasy game where I'm messing around with classes and different abilities. That's pretty much going to be Final Fantasy V, which I've played through many times before. And then even kind of ignoring the lack of characterization for the 4 main characters and just kind of analyzing the story on a lore level, I found the whole Garland time loop stuff to be kind of bizarre. Maybe some of it just went over my head. He's talking about how he, as Garland, was an evil knight who was killed by the 4 heroes of the light in the present day. Then the 4 fiends sent him back in time to become the demon Chaos, and then he was supposed to kill them then, and then 2,000 years later devolve into a human that was weak enough to be killed by the 4 heroes, and then supposed to get sent back to... What was he originally? Was he originally a human knight who the 4 fiends made into the demon god Chaos? Or was he originally the demon god Chaos who somehow became weaker and turned into a human knight who became weak enough for the 4 heroes to kill? Either way, it seems to be the case that at some point he turned from this massive, powerful demon god Chaos into a knight named Garland working for the king, Cornelia or whatever, who was weak enough to be killed by 4 heroes at level 4. So that was a little strange. And then the ending said even Garland is still waiting for them in the future, and I'm like, really is he? That's weird. Okay, I don't... Yeah, and then the time loop was broken. I don't know. I guess I should give it credit for trying to throw in some sci-fi concepts beyond the simplest possible, ripping off Lord of the Rings or Dungeons and Dragons story back from when it came out in the 80s. But I just felt the pieces didn't quite all fit together. The explanation seemed a little bit lacking to me. It felt a little. I know I'm judging a. I'm judging a 1987 or is it video game or 88 through like 2023 video game standards and be like, oh, the lore doesn't quite check out. It's a 35-year-old video game. Maybe I shouldn't. I should be a little more forgiving. But ultimately, I would say that what admiration I had for Final Fantasy 1 Pixel Remaster, beyond just enjoying it as something to look at and listen to as someone who enjoys retro video game aesthetics and retro video game music, probably just comes down to the precedent it's set, frankly. For future games, like I said, I don't know if I'll do a 4 through 6 review, because I bought the whole 6-game set on Switch for almost $80 and it came out the other week. I told myself I wasn't going to because I know I'm going to play Zelda next month, so I'm like, but as soon as I saw it on the eShop, and I'm not too impulsive when it comes to the eShop, really. I've had games sitting on my wish list for literally years that I've never pulled the trigger on. I'm good about not building up too insane of a backlog, where I buy game after game after game. Usually I'll only impulse buy a game if the price is down like 75+%. And I'm like, well, now's the time to jump on this if I ever intend on playing it, But yeah, I've had games sitting on my wish list for 4 or 5 years that I do look interesting to me. I just haven't pulled the trigger on them yet. But this one, the second I saw it, Final Fantasy 1 through 6 on Switch for one download, I was an out of body experience. I was like the drug addict who can't keep the needle out of my skin, right? I just felt my fingers flying out. I had to have it. I had to have it immediately on my Switch. But what admiration I have for Final Fantasy 1 really would probably come down to the precedent it's set for just kind of building the series to the future. But certainly once you start bringing in more abilities, summoners, espers, changing classes, changing party members, chocobos, and perhaps the most important addition above all others of actual story and actual characters, that made a world of difference to me. But it's funny, then once you start getting to the other side of the Final Fantasy Super Nintendo trilogy, then I started to have almost the opposite problem. Like, I've never beaten Final Fantasy X either, and I can tell you exactly why. It's because it had too many cutscenes for me. I've made, I think, 3 aborted attempts at getting through Final Fantasy X over the years. Each and every one, I could not tolerate the amount of time I was just staring at the screen watching a movie. I was just like, can I play a video game? I was like, Jurassic Park, there's going to be gaming in this video game, right? But now this is the opposite. Now, right, there's not enough cuts. I'm like Goldilocks. This Final Fantasy games have not enough cutscenes in the story. These ones have too much cutscene in the story. I want the middle bed that's just right, the porridge that's neither too hot nor cold, which for me is my holy, sacred, beloved Super Nintendo Final Fantasy trilogy, which, yeah, I don't know, maybe I'll have to do reviews on those if I can. I would end up talking for hours about each one, probably. I have so many thoughts and so much to say, but yeah, Final Fantasy 1, I'm glad I played it. Not going to be a game I go back to every year. Probably not even every 5 or 10 years. Maybe I'll do a different playthrough at some point again before I die. Maybe I'll try to do a playthrough with no fighters and see how that works. That would make the first 3/4 of the game much more difficult, I'll say that much. But ultimately, this game, I appreciated this. I appreciated this more in kind of the way you appreciate standing in a museum looking at artwork from hundreds of years ago, like, that's interesting. More than I was truly grabbed and emotionally engaged and riveted by the gameplay or story experience of it. But yeah, it's weird to talk about these. This isn't the only franchise that kind of evolved in this way, because another game that's easily in my top 10 all-time favorites list would be Super Metroid. But if I was to go back and do a review of NES Metroid, I would have very similar things to say, compared to how I talked about this game versus the Super Nintendo Final Fantasy games. Like, I would say, no save feature, takes a million years to charge up your health after dying, no mini-map, monotonous hallways and corridors, bosses are kind of pathetic looking, the abilities feel a little lackluster compared to how they feel in future games. So it's all about building the building blocks of series, whether it's Mario, Metroid, Zelda, Final Fantasy, even Mega Man 1 compared to Mega Man 2 and everything from 2 onward. Basically, it's a lot of these series the first games are rarely the best. You know, they're all about kind of setting the groundwork, right? So in that way, you know, I'm certainly glad that Final Fantasy 1 exists, but was it my favorite or 20th favorite JRPG experience in the last few years? Probably not, but that's okay. And yeah, I will continue onward. Obviously, I'm going to be dropping everything in the next few weeks to play Tears of the Kingdom. So if I beat Final Fantasy 2 before then, I'll also do a review of that. Yeah, whenever I do. Oh, yeah, but if I don't beat it by then, maybe the review would end up being, you know, in like September or something like that once I'm done with Tears of the Kingdom. But I will try to, at the very least, yeah, I think I should have enough time to squeeze through a playthrough of Final Fantasy 2. And if I do, I'll pop out a review of that sometime in before Tears of the Kingdom comes out. If I don't, then you'll know that I missed that mark, and then you'll have to wait till the end of the year to get my Final Fantasy 2 review. But yeah. Talk more Final Fantasy and retro gaming and JRPGs with y'all again later.